Yes! Hello, world! What is up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte, and we are here live at the Build Studio in New York City. Our first guest is a New York Times bestselling author. He has written, 19, 20 books on ADHD and various social and psychological topics. However, his latest, Because I Come From a Crazy Family, The Making of a Psychiatrist, bit of a departure. The Batman Begins origin story, if you will, of this cerebral superhero of sorts. His story, as told in this book, is a wild one, and I'm really excited to talk to him all about it. Ladies and gentlemen, please make some noise and welcome the great Dr. Edward M. Hallowell right here. Come on, make some noise for Dr. Hallowell. Ed, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing so well. Congratulations on, and we were talking about this in the green room, number 20. This is officially the 20th book.
Yes.
That is amazing. Congratulations on that, man. I'm really...
I know. It is true, though. It's true. I've written all those books.
Wow. I'm excited to talk about the process behind this one because, of course, this is a different kind of book for you. Before we get into any of that, how are you doing today? How's Thursday going so far? How's Ed?
It's going well. My Uber driver couldn't get here, and so he had to drop me off, and I had to find my way. And with someone with ADD, that's not easy. So I was thinking, what if I don't get there? What are they going to do? I mean, but I found my way. So today started with a victory.
It certainly
did. A victory over my failing brain.
You've got to celebrate all of those victories.
Yeah, really. So I feel triumphant.
For what it's worth, we would have waited. We were excited you were coming.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, in the future, don't stress over that. Prepare accordingly.
I tried to use whatever's on my iPhone to get me here, but I don't know how to use it.
Hit or miss sometimes.
So I asked strangers.
Yeah.
That's my fallback position in life. I rely on the kindness of strangers.
In this city, that's a 50-50, but usually you come out on top. Did you resort to any of that today? Did you talk to any interesting people?
I did. Yeah. All the strangers who got me here. That was that Blanche Dubois line in Streetcar Named Desire? I think so.
Yeah. Well, then we start with a victory and thanking and celebrating the kind strangers of New York City for bringing you to us today. Yeah. So as has been much discussed, this is a memoir. It's different. Your other books typically some kind of direct advice. I want to talk about why number 20 was different. Was it a matter of those other 19 made you ready for this, or did you feel finally your story was worthy of it? What inspired this book?
Well, I didn't think it was worthy of it at all. So I really didn't. But my wife said, you have to write this. You have to write your story. And I said, nobody wants to read my story. And she said, no, they want to read your story. It's not that it's you, it's the story. And it's so unusual that you went through all that you went through and it came out the other end. Right. And I said, but honestly, I'm not famous. And they want to read Hillary Clinton stories, but... And she said, I'm telling you, they want to read this story. And I said, well, all right, I'll write a proposal. And if any publisher bites, then I'll go ahead. And sure enough, we had several publishers bite. And the one that we ended up going with was the editor who had edited, of all my books, my favorite book, which is, The Childhood Roots of Adult Happiness. That's the one that of all my books, the one that I have the most affection for. And so Nancy Miller at Bloomsbury was the editor of this book. I love Nancy, and she really helped shape it and brought it along. And Sue, my wife, said, I've never seen you get into writing. We'd go out for dinner, have a dinner party, and I would come home at 10 o'clock at night, and I'd run into the dining room where I do my writing, and I'd stay up till midnight writing, and it just came out of me. It had been sitting there. I'm 68 years old. It had been sitting there, and I couldn't have Alzheimer's because I have picture perfect memory of when I was 6 years old and 7 years old. And my residency, people who were with me back at Mass Mental Health Center, they said, I don't know how you do it, but you got it right. Those are exactly the way it happened. So people ask me, did you make stuff up? No, I mean, I can't. It's not verbatim the conversations, but it is the way it happened. And I discovered writing it the reason was, it was kind of a love letter to my family and a love letter to crazy people, if you will. Because I think it was a way of saying, we really have got to stop stigmatizing all of this. You know, we really have to celebrate craziness, because, you know, when we say someone is crazy, that doesn't define the whole person. No. You know, and most people who have a so-called mental illness also have brilliance. They have extraordinary talent. I mean, our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, had a major mental illness. Yeah. And most people who have, in fact, it's rare to find an extraordinarily talented, creative person who doesn't have one of the conditions we diagnose. So I, without meaning to, was really trying to, by getting naked myself, by showing the wonderfully interesting, crazy, brilliant people in my family, including me. You know, I have ADD and dyslexia and all kind of quirky habits that, you know, that embedded in these so-called illnesses, which is a term that I don't like, embedded in these bizarrenesses, are the very qualities that advance the world. Are we're the people, we crazy people, are the people who come up with the new ideas, who come up with the game changers, and that's really what I wanted to show. This is not a polemic book. This is not an abstract book. This is a story book. It's a bunch of stories about a lot of interesting, eccentric, some crazy people. But I discovered in writing it that it was a love letter to them, and then to the patients I treated at Mass Mental Health Center, but moreover to the whole world of people who are different, who are very different.
There's a lot in there I want to unpack, but the one thing that does stick out to me that I'm curious about, you describe this process of getting naked, of this telling these stories, these personal stories, demands a level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
You've always been open about your ADD, about your dyslexia, but this is a different level. This is next level.
Right.
Was that jarring? Was that challenging? What was it like exploring that for the first time in your history of writing all these other books? Here we are. This is something completely new, even though it's the 20th time you've been through these steps.
Well, part of my craziness, if you will, is that I'm very able to be open. In fact, I'm not able not to be open. You know, I have a problem. Yeah. I have a real problem being deceptive. I have a real problem playing it close to the vest. I can't do it. I'm just very naturally transparent, and so I didn't have much of a problem being vulnerable. And you know, people ask me that. I think one of the problems with the world is people are too wary, they're too standoffish, and we're too governed by fear. We're too governed by what will other people think. I mean, if we would just come out of hiding and connect, you know. I mean, the Surgeon General says the #1 problem in the country is loneliness. #1 medical problem is loneliness. And that's so easily solved. All you have to do is reach out. And the reason people don't is they're afraid. Yeah. You know, and fear, you know, fear rules, and that's not good. So for whatever reason, I'm not ruled by fear. Maybe I should be. Maybe, you know, I've been taken advantage of more than a few times. And if I'd been more wary, if I'd been more fearful, then I maybe wouldn't have been, you know, so.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin is, what would you have missed out on because you were so weary and fearful? So,
yeah,
okay,
I'd rather be, you know, bumpkin that I am than you know, than some conniving, you know.
People
always
love a bumpkin.
Yeah, right. Always
Bumpkins have friends all over, man. There's nothing wrong with bumpkins. That's why you were able to get directions walking around. That's what dictates which way that coin flips. The 50-50 to get the directions or not.
Right.
You're a bumpkin. It's
exactly,
yeah, man. I'm going to help this guy out, of course.
Right.
You know, I'm curious, your ability, and maybe this goes back to the bumpkinness and all of that, but, you know, within this book, there are funny moments. There are some harrowing moments. There are some really crazy. It runs the gamut. It's all over the place in a great way, that the story kind of has everything, and you've been through a lot of stuff. And I'm always come back to your ability to see everything as a victory almost, no matter what the circumstances, to accept them for what they were, even the circumstances under which you were conceived.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you find, I don't know if silver lining is the right term, but were you always able to have that positive energy, or did you have to develop, was that a muscle you developed being surrounded by all of this craziness? Where does that come from?
I think it was a gift my mother gave me. You know, I think it was genetic. It wasn't a gift my father gave me. He tended more toward the doer, you know, glass half empty. But he had his other positives. But my mother just and you know, she never found what she should have found. She suffered a lot, but she always saw, she was talking about the bluebird of happiness, and she always looked for the bright side. And I think I just inherited that from her. I think I was born with a tendency to do that. You mentioned how I was conceived. You want me to tell that story?
Go for it. It's wild, man.
Well, my dad, you know, it all started out so wonderfully. He was an All-American hockey player at Harvard, led the nation in scoring and penalty minutes, which shows you what kind of a player he was. He married my mother, who was the most beautiful debutante in Boston, according to the Boston Herald, and they got married, started out, had my two brothers. Everything looked wonderful. And then the war came, and he went off. He was captain of a destroyer escort. He fought submarines in the North Atlantic. Was a war hero, and came back, and he went crazy, and was psychotic, was put in the hospital, diagnosed schizophrenic. That's what they diagnosed everyone who was psychotic back then. And they gave him shock treatment, insulin shock, electric shock, and didn't help him much. But one weekend they decided, well, let's give him a trial visit home, and they sent him home. Well, he was in no shape to go home. And when he got home, he decided that he wanted to murder my mother. Well, she was very artful with men, and she was able to talk him into making love instead of murdering her. And that's where I came from.
That's wild. Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
What was your reaction the first time you heard that story? That's where you came from?
I said, Mom, you've got to be kidding. She said, no, that's where you came from. Wow. I should have said, why are you telling me this? But
I said, pass the ketchup. Why would you share that? This is so... No, why... What was the lens through which she told it? What were your mom's feelings about that? That is a terrifying story.
Well, it was when I was pressing her on why did you get divorced? Was he really crazy? And she sort of said, "Okay, do you want to know how crazy he was?" And so, you know, I'll see you crazy and I'll raise you crazy. And so. You know, it was maybe too much information, but it
not for the book.
Yeah, no, and it made me proud of her that she was resourceful enough, and not only that, after he finished conceiving me, he then got up and went out into the backyard. They were on a farm, and he was stark naked, put on some galoshes, and he took a shotgun and he imagined the crows circling around were Nazi airplanes. So he started blasting them out of the sky. And boom, boom, and these crows coming down all bloody. And the neighbors, you know, were upset about this, but they didn't know what to do, so they called the police. Right. Well, the police didn't want to disarm this naked, crazy war hero. So they said, we don't know what to do. So my mother marches out into the cornfield and
Saint.
Yeah, and disarms my father. Says, Benny, come on, you don't want to be doing that. Give me the gun. And you know, once again, risking her life, she disarms him, and
unbelievable.
Back he goes to the hospital. So you know, that's sort of the and so I grew up with these characters. I mean, my dad was brilliant. My uncle. I mean, he wasn't ever hospitalized, but he was magna cum laude at Harvard, physics, romance, languages, absolute, would have been superb CEO or Goldman Sachs, but he was racked by anxiety. But it wasn't called anxiety back then. He didn't know what to call it, but he just didn't dare enter into the whatever you want to call it out there. And so he retreated first to a farm and then started a bowling alley down on Cape Cod, and he never became what he could have become. But I loved talking to him. He was so smart and interested in philosophy, and he was so brilliant. He invented a kind of corn that crows wouldn't eat. So, you know, he was a great jokester. He was trainer. He was short, so he couldn't play football, but he loved it. And so he became trainer of the Harvard football team. And in the Harvard-Yale game one year, he rigged up the Yale urinals so with an electrical charge, you know. When the Yale players went to pee, an electrical charge traveled up, you know, and they went hopping around the locker room, you know, screaming in pain. They just electrocuted their nether parts, and you know, so he was a great practical jokester.
The old electrical charge and the nether parts trick, yeah,
exactly,
that old dodge.
Exactly.
Let me ask you something. The stories like that, there's an endless amount of those stories in this book, and that's why I love this thing so much, and I enjoyed reading it so much. I'm curious, and forgive me if this comes from a place of ignorance here, but I'm curious about, over the years, how your ADD or your dyslexia has affected or impacted your process as a writer, and if it's evolved and you've developed ways around that, or mental gymnastics, or if it hasn't impacted it at all.
Oh, no, it's impacted mostly positively.
Yeah.
The dyslexia, it means that I'm a very slow reader.
Okay.
But I get there. I mean, my wife says, I don't know how you know anything, because it takes me so long to read a book. I mean, it really takes, but I majored in English at Harvard. You
That's
know,
one of those wife-level mean comments.
Well,
I don't know how you know
anything, right? You know, because she sees, you know, I buy books and they sit there. They don't ever seem to get read, but they do get into my head. You know,
it comes from a place of love.
Yeah, right.
No one else can pull that off.
Do you read them in the middle of the night? I mean, you know, what do you sneak under the covers? I mean, what? And you know, but so I'm a painfully slow reader. But that's the manifestation of my dyslexia. And as far as the ADD goes, I did have trouble. I still remember in 8th grade, my teacher writing me a comment. You know, succinct, perhaps two, meaning I had trouble developing a story. So and that's a common with ADD. We have trouble adding on. But I learned how to flesh things out, and then it became an asset, because I could go off on these wild and woolly tangents. I could come up with images and ideas nobody else could. And they said, where do you come up with this stuff? And I said, I have no idea. That's the honest answer in the world of ADD to any why question is, I don't know. You know, but I have this very fertile imagination, and I can dream stuff up, and it just keeps feeding and keeps coming. So I see my ADD is a huge asset, and I've learned how to structure it, channel it, and that's why my whole work with ADD is I tell people I don't treat disabilities. I help you unwrap your gift, and if you do it, it becomes an. Now I'm not saying it's easy. You know, it can be a terrible problem. Untreated ADD, that's the prison population, the addicted pop. So it can be a horrible curse, but if you learn to manage it, it's a tremendous asset. And
well, as you were describing the way in which you employ it, it's. I was thinking, it sounds like, I joked, this is the Batman Begins, but like it is a superpower in a sense that you have this ability that, because you manage it, that you can find these crazy avenues and these wonderful, delightful, creative ideas that other people might be shut off to.
They're X-Men. The CEO of this company, Tim Armstrong, you know, he's got it big time, and he says it's his great superpower. Yeah, and he wouldn't trade it for the world.
It's fascinating. We're going to go to the audience in just a second. There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about, because you talk a lot. We talked about it earlier. You mentioned it, destigmatizing mental health.
Yeah.
And I think of, like, years ago when, you know, Britney shaved her head, or when Dave Chappelle ran off to South Africa, or whatever the hell's most recently happening with Kanye. There's like this, we have this pop culture kind of toxic fascination when a celebrity encounters some kind of, you know, mental hurdle or difficulty. And I'm wondering, how do we influence these conversations for the better? You know, you've done so much work, not just this book, but your entire body of work to demystify and destigmatize. How do we tackle something like in the way in which we approach celebrities with mental challenges and things of that nature?
Yeah, and you know, and I want to be careful to demystify, destigmatize, but not sanitize.
Right.
You know, not take the punch out of it. I mean, these conditions can be very painful, and they can be very weird. You know, so not make it say, oh, really, it's just normalcy with a little wrinkle to it. No, it's not. It's not. Psychosis is not normal. You know, it's 4+ weird, but it's manageable and it's not dangerous. Your average banker is far more dangerous than your average psychotic person. So, you know, and so, you know, so these people are not to be feared. They're to be understood. And so, you know, the hope is to take the fear and the stigmatization, and we allow language directed at people who are mentally ill that we've gotten rid of with every other minority group. We allow incredible bad words, wacko, nut job, sicko. I mean, we've done away with those with other groups, but we allow them with it, and it's just wrong. You know, I say crazy in my title, sort of on purpose, using the most common, but it's not a nice term. You know, I refer to my own family as crazy, to beat other people to the punch. But you know, we ought to use words that are more understanding, and we ought to realize that there's almost no family that isn't touched by this in one way or another. You mentioned famous people. The 2 suicides recently, Bourdain and the designer, what's her name?
Kate Spade.
Yeah, Kate Spade. I'm almost certain that had they not been afraid of tarnishing their brand, you know, they would have gotten more help.
Been afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, that they would have gotten more intensive help, and the help is there.
Yeah.
You know, this is the one field of medicine where most people don't get help. Everyone else goes to the doctor for their chest pain, their hip pain, you know, but mental health, particularly high-end people, they don't want to be associated. Oh, no, I don't want the neighbors to know about that, or they sneak in the back door. Yeah. And we got to put an end to that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. If anything, I think you should be proud of it. Like I said, I think the most interesting people have one or another of these conditions, you know, an anxiety disorder, ADD, bipolar disorder, depression, you name it. And so part of my reason in writing this is to celebrate it. It's a love letter to these differences. And they can be horrible. They can be just terribly difficult to live with, but they're all work-withable. Yeah. And these are lovably interesting people.
Well, I got to tell you, for your first memoir, congratulations, hell of a job, man. Congratulations. It's a great read. I really enjoyed spending time with this book, and it's fascinating. Your story's fascinating. The work you've done is fascinating. We're going to take some questions from the audience, but before we do, because I come from a crazy family, The Making of a Psychiatrist, it's available right now where books are sold. Is there an audiobook?
Yes.
And there's an audiobook. Fantastic. Yes. Let's go ahead. We got some microphones in the room. First one's coming right here.
Hi. As someone who writes using personal stories, which part of the process do you find to be the most challenging?
Wondering. How honest to be. You know, I mean, how honest to be? Because I don't want to be so honest that it makes the reader uncomfortable, and yet I want to be honest enough that it's engaging, you know, and I think I pulled it off in this book. I don't think you didn't feel uncomfortable.
No, and it's a delicate balance when a story involves your father naked shooting crows in a shotgun. Right. Like, you know, finding that spot, you're walking a tightrope. Right. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I was just blown away.
Right. So for me that was the you know, you don't want to give too much information, but you want to give enough to make it very real and visceral. You don't want to, you know, sanitize it and make it sound like just an ordinary. So you're writing personal stories?
Yeah.
Good for you. I mean, I think I find it very engaging, particularly these days when it's hard to get true stories. So I think memoir is a wonderful genre to go into.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Great question. All we got was that one more. We're going to do one more right here. Come on down.
Hi.
Hi.
So congratulations on your 20th book.
Thank you.
I had a question about the writing process and how that's changed for you since you're writing your first book, what you've learned and what you've changed, I guess.
Well, by far the biggest change was the advent of word processing. When I had to use cut and paste and literally eraser tape and all that, I mean, word processing was a complete game changer. But beyond the techniques of writing, I think the biggest change is just the evolution of. I mean, the more you do it, the better you get, and it's wonderful that my brain has not yet failed me. And so I saved, writing a memoir to. I think I'm at my peak now. I mean, the writing in this book is my best. I mean, this is my best book, and my wife says that, and she's a good judge. So
And she thinks you don't know anything.
yeah, exactly, exactly. I really so and I think you can pretty much take it to the bank. The more you do it, the better you get. And you don't waste your time reading many books about writing. You can read a few, but read only a few, and basically just do it, and then get other people to critique it. But keep doing it. Don't get so many critiques that you get all bogged down and get all frozen up. Don't keep worrying about the audience. Don't keep worrying about what are they going to think. In fact, I loved what, what's her name, the great female novelist just came out with a new book, Ann Tyler. She said, someone asked her, what's the best way to write a novel? And she said, pretend no one's going to read it. And it's so don't worry about making a mistake. And swim out over your head. Swim out over your head. And that way it'll be fresh.
Thank you. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, guys. Thank you for being such a great audience. I'll say it one last time, because I come from a crazy family. The Making of a Psychiatrist available where books are sold, man, and on audiobook as well. So get out there, and I'm telling you, it's a great read, especially in the hot months of summer here. You need a good book. This is a great book. I want to congratulate you once more, and thank you so much for being here. I hope you had fun, Doc.
Matt, I love talking to you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you got to come back for the next one, all right? It's a pleasure talking to you. Everybody, please make some noise for Dr. Edward Hallowell. Man, thank you so much.